Tracy White delivered eggs to the Grand Imperial Hotel every single afternoon after school. 9 years old, invisible to everyone in that gleaming kitchen, just another errand kid hauling crates through the service entrance, while the wealthy world moved around her like she wasn't there. Nobody knew she spoke Arabic. Her father, gone 3 years now, had been from Beirut, had taught her the language before the accident that stole him and left only cassette tapes and memories. Now it was just Tracy and her grandmother, a modest poultry farm, and a hotel contract that kept the lights on. So Tracy carried eggs and kept her head down and said yes ma'am and no sir and stayed invisible. She'd seen the hotel's owner exactly twice. Jian In Ho, 34 years old, neck tattoos, eyes like polished stone, the kind of man who looked straight through a delivery girl like she was made of air. His security team sometimes spoke Arabic near the loading dock. Thought nobody in the city understood a word, but Tracy understood every word. And at 5:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, balancing a crate of fresh eggs at the service entrance, she heard 4 words that turned her hands to ice. When he opens the door, she looked at the sleek black car idling at the hotel's front curb, looked at the guards near it, relaxed, smirking, and a 9-year-old girl who was supposed to be invisible understood with absolute certainty that someone was about to die. Before we go any further, I have to take a second to shout out some of the people who make telling these stories worth it. Tony Green, Alyssa Williams, Kisa Kane. You guys and a host of others I can't name at the moment show up every single time, and this channel feels it. If you're watching and you're enjoying what we're doing on here, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, drop your comments, and stay in this story with us. This community is the reason Tracy gets to have her moment. Now let's get back to it. The alarm didn't wake Tracy. The chickens did. 5:14 a.m., and the yard behind their house on Delmont Street was already loud with the kind of noise that didn't care what day it was or how tired you were. Tracy lay still for exactly 3 seconds, staring at the water stain on her bedroom ceiling that looked like a running dog, then swung her legs over the side of the mattress and reached for her socks. Grandmother White was already in the yard. Tracy could see her through the small window above the sink, moving between the wire pens with a feed bucket in each hand, her housecoat tucked into rubber boots, her gray locks wrapped under a yellow headscarf. 71 years old and already working like the sun owed her something. Tracy watched her for a moment before going outside, the way she sometimes did, storing the image somewhere safe. The morning air smelled like feed grain and damp soil, and the particular sharpness of a yard that held living things. Tracy pulled her red hoodie over her pajama top and crossed the grass. "Take that bucket," her grandmother said, without turning around. Tracy took it. They worked in the rhythm they'd built over 2 years, Grandmother White calling out which hens had laid overnight, Tracy moving through the pens with the collection tray, both of them quiet in the easy way of people who have shared enough mornings to not need words before sunrise. The Delmont hens were good layers, 31 birds, and on a strong morning they'd pull close to 2 dozen eggs before 7 o'clock. Grandmother White kept a running tally in a small orange notebook she carried in her housecoat pocket. Every egg counted, literally. 43 this week so far, her grandmother said, setting her buckets down near the packing table. We need 60 by Thursday or we're short on the hotel order. We'll get there, Tracy set her tray down carefully. Rosie's clutch alone. Rosie's been slow, don't count Rosie. Her grandmother pulled out the orange notebook and made a mark. I'm counting what's in front of me, not what might be. That was the rule of the yard. Count what's in front of you. Tracy started on the crate packing while her grandmother began the morning checks, water levels, pen latches, the corner section where 2 of the younger hens had been skittish all week. The Grand Imperial Hotel took 3 crates every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, each crate holding 30 eggs, individually wrapped in paper and packed tight enough to survive the bus ride across town. The contract was 14 months old. It had started small, 1 crate, a trial order, the kind of thing a hotel kitchen agreed to mostly as a favor to a supplier who'd been referred by someone's cousin. But the chef had reordered, then increased the quantity, then added the Thursday delivery. For Grandmother White's operation, it was the difference between a business and a hobby. Check the seal on that bottom crate, her grandmother said, passing behind her. Last time one of the clasps was loose. Tracy checked it. The clasp held fine. She set it aside and reached for the next. They packed in silence for a while. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up, a car starting 2 houses down, someone's radio drifting through a fence, the distant clatter of a garbage truck working its way up the street. Delmont wasn't a bad block. It was a working block. The kind of street where people left early and came back tired and didn't ask too much of the world because the world had already made its position on the matter pretty clear. Grandmother White sat down on the wooden stool by the packing table and opened her notebook to a page Tracy recognized, the one with the 2 columns. Income on the left, expenses on the right. The right column had been winning for the better part of 3 months. The feed supplier is raising his price again, her grandmother said. It wasn't a complaint. She said it the way she said most hard things, plainly, with her reading glasses pushed up on her nose, as if the fact being uncomfortable didn't change the fact being true. 12%, starting next month. Tracy kept wrapping eggs. How much does that put us back? Enough, her grandmother closed the notebook. The hotel contract has to hold, Tracy. I need you to understand that, not just as an errand, as the thing that holds everything else up. Tracy understood. She'd understood for a while, longer, probably, than her grandmother knew. She'd seen the notebook. She'd heard the phone calls her grandmother stepped outside to take, the ones where her voice got quiet and careful. She knew what enough meant in this house. It meant exactly as bad as you're imagining. It'll hold, Tracy said. Her grandmother looked at her over the top of her glasses, and something in her expression shifted. Not doubt, exactly, but the kind of love that knows better than to argue with a 9-year-old certainty, because that certainty is one of the few things keeping the whole morning going. Come eat something before you pack those gloves. Breakfast was toast and a boiled egg, always an egg, which Tracy had long stopped finding funny, and the small radio on the kitchen counter playing a station that mostly did weather and old gospel. Grandmother White stood at the stove and didn't sit down, the way she never sat down during breakfast, and Tracy ate at the table and watched the morning come through the yellow curtains. It was on a morning exactly like this one, 3 years ago, that her father had taught her the Arabic word for egg. Beta. He'd held one up from the bowl on the counter, an ordinary brown egg, and said it like it was something worth knowing. That's what your grandfather called it back home. He'd sat across from her at this same table, in the chair that now had a stack of feed catalogs on it, and they'd gone through the kitchen word by word, Ma for water, Cubs for bread, Shams for sun. He made it a game, the way he made most things games, giving each word a gesture or a face until Tracy was laughing too hard to forget any of them. Her father had been the kind of man who believed that knowing something, anything, was never wasted. Languages are keys, baby girl. He tapped her temple gently. You don't know which doors you'll need to open. He'd grown up moving between his mother's English and his father's Arabic the way most kids moved between rooms, easy and natural, and he'd wanted that for Tracy. So they practiced. Every morning, every evening. Cassette tapes he'd recorded himself, his voice slow and clear and patient, walking her through vocabulary and phrases and the particular music of a language that lived in the back of the throat. She still had the tapes, all 7 of them in a shoebox under her bed. She still played them. Not because she thought she'd ever need Arabic on Delmont Street, just because it kept his voice in the room. 3 years since the accident, 2 years, 10 months, and some days she didn't count. Her grandmother touched the back of her head gently on the way past, the lightest possible contact, just enough to say, I know what you're thinking and you're not alone in it. And Tracy took the last bite of her toast and stood up to get her gloves. By 3:15 p.m., the crates were loaded into the rolling cart their grandmother had rigged from an old garden dolly and 2 pieces of pipe, the kind of solution that worked perfectly and looked like exactly what it was. Tracy wore her red hoodie and her heavy work gloves and her good sneakers, the ones without the hole in the left toe. She had the delivery slip in her front pocket, folded in quarters. She had bus fare in her back pocket, exact change. She had her grandmother's phone number memorized in her head, even though she also had it written on her wrist, which her grandmother had done herself with a ballpoint pen that morning. Straight there, straight back, Grandmother White said at the gate. No detours. No detours. You have the slip. I have the slip. And you'll wait for the chef's signature. Don't let them wave you off without the signature. Last time the sous chef tried to take the crates without signing, and I waited until he did. Tracy smiled. I know, Grandma. Her grandmother looked at her for a moment. Just looked, the way she sometimes did, like she was trying to memorize something she was afraid of forgetting. Then she reached out and straightened the drawstring on Tracy's hoodie, even though it didn't need straightening. Your father would be proud of your hustle, she said quietly. Now go before you miss the 3:22. Tracy pulled the cart through the gate and started down Delmont. She didn't look back, because she knew if she did she'd see her grandmother still standing there, still watching, and it would make her chest hurt in the specific way it did when she thought too long about how much weight that woman carried on 71-year-old shoulders without ever once putting it down. So she kept moving, cart wheels rattling on the pavement, 3 crates of eggs packed tight, each one representing something that mattered. The 3:22 bus smelled like the usual combination of exhaust and someone's takeout, and Tracy wedged the cart into the space by the rear doors and held it steady through 3 turns and a hard stop at the light on Kendrick Avenue. The city moved past the window in layers, corner stores giving way to office buildings giving way to the kind of block where the sidewalks were pressure washed and the doormen wore earpieces. The Grand Imperial sat at the far end of that world, its glass face catching the late afternoon light, its entrance flanked by 2 men in black suits who never once looked at the service entrance around back. The service entrance was Tracy's door, had been for 14 months. She knew the loading dock schedule, knew which guards rotated at 4 p.m., knew that the chef's sign-off window closed at 6:00 sharp, and that if you weren't through the kitchen before then, you were coming back tomorrow. She had plenty of time. She pulled the cart off the bus at the Grand Imperial stop, checked the strap on the top crate, and headed for the service lane. 60 eggs, 3 crates, 1 signature, and then back to Delmont before dark. Simple, routine, safe. She had no way of knowing that in exactly 2 hours and 32 minutes, routine was going to be the most dangerous thing about this afternoon. Tracy doesn't know yet what's waiting for her in that loading dock, but Victor has been planning this for weeks, and he chose today because of that exact routine she's walking into. Comment EGGS if you're already worried about this little girl. Jian In Ho did not own an alarm clock. He didn't need one. His body had been conditioned over 14 years of discipline to surface from sleep at exactly 5:00 a.m., clean and alert, the way a blade comes out of a sheath, no hesitation, no transition period, no lying in the dark wondering what day it was. He was simply asleep, and then he was awake, and the city outside his penthouse window was still gray, and the day was already his to command. He dressed without music, without television, without the particular noise most people needed to ease themselves into consciousness. Silence was not empty to In Ho, it was information. A quiet room told him everything was where he'd left it. Noise was what happened when things slipped out of control. He had not allowed things to slip out of control in a very long time. By 5:20 he was at the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse, espresso in hand, looking down at the city the way a man looks at a map he's already memorized. Seoul at this hour was a city caught between 2 versions of itself, the exhausted version finishing the night and the relentless version gearing up for the day. From 41 floors up, both versions looked the same. Small, manageable, his. He had built this from nothing, not from a little, from nothing. No inheritance, no connections, no safety net of any kind. Just a ferocious clarity about what the world responded to, which was not kindness, not charm, not the kind of warmth that made people feel comfortable around you. The world responded to certainty. To the specific gravity of a man who had decided exactly what he wanted and had removed everything standing between himself and that thing, methodically, without sentiment, without pause. At 34, Jian In Ho was the kind of man other men watched from across rooms, not because he was loud, because he was still in a way that made everything around him feel slightly unstable by comparison. He finished the espresso, set the cup down precisely on the coaster, opened his schedule. 6:00 a.m. Review overnight reports. 6:45 a.m. Call with legal team regarding the Siacho restructuring. 8:00 a.m. Meeting with the new financial advisors. 11:30 a.m. Lunch, which he would eat alone at his desk in 11 minutes. 2:00 p.m. Final sign-off on the transition documents. 5:50 p.m. Depart office. 6:00 p.m. Enter car. 6:15 p.m. Home. He read through it once, made one notation in the margin, confirm legal call moved to secure line, and closed the folder. The transition documents were the most significant thing on that list, though they appeared the most ordinary. 14 years of building an empire through channels that did not appear in any public filing was coming to an end. The Siacho restructuring was in Ho's calculated exit from every enterprise that required him to operate outside the law. Not out of conscience, out of arithmetic. The risk-to-return ratio had shifted. The legal world had more room in it now, and he intended to occupy that room entirely. His advisors understood this. His lawyers understood this. Whether everyone else understood it was a question he hadn't finished answering. He didn't dwell on it. Dwelling was sentiment by another name. Victor appeared at the office door at precisely 7:58 a.m., 2 minutes before the scheduled meeting with the financial advisors, which meant he'd timed his arrival to catch In Ho before the room filled. In Ho noted this without looking up from the document he was reading. "The advisors are on their way up," Victor said, "and there's a small issue with this afternoon's kitchen delivery." In Ho turned a page. "What kind of issue?" "The poultry supplier. Apparently there was some problem with the Thursday order, short on count, or a billing discrepancy. The chef wasn't clear. He wants to know if you'd like him to hold the contract review until next week." In Ho looked up then. Not because the matter was significant enough to require his full attention, but because Victor was standing in the doorway of his office discussing a chicken egg order 2 minutes before a meeting that would reshape 8 figures of restructured capital, and he wanted to make sure his expression communicated exactly what that indicated about his patience. "Tell the chef to handle it," he said. "That is what a chef does." He mentioned the supplier is a regular, grandmother, local operation, been with us about 14 months. "Victor," In Ho's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I don't manage egg deliveries, resolve it below my level or replace whoever can't." Victor's jaw moved almost imperceptibly. "Of course, sir." "And close the door on your way out. Send the advisors in when they arrive." The door closed. In Ho returned to his document. The delivery issue was already gone from his mind before the latch clicked. This was the architecture of In Ho's thinking. Concentric rings with himself at the center and everything organized by proximity to what actually mattered. At the innermost ring, the restructuring, the transition, the legal framework being built around his legitimate enterprises. At the next ring, the people managing those processes. Further out still, the operational layers that kept the hotel functioning, staff, vendors, kitchen contracts. Maintenance schedules. And at the outermost edge, barely visible from where he stood, the small, ordinary machinery of a city that moved around him without his attention or investment. A 9-year-old girl delivering eggs existed so far outside those concentric rings that she didn't register as a variable at all. She was furniture. She was background. She was the category of thing that simply continued happening while the actual world made its decisions. This was not cruelty in Ho's framework. It was efficiency. You could not govern an empire by distributing your attention equally across everything inside it. Focus was the mechanism. Hierarchy was the structure. Everyone had a function and a level, and the system worked when people operated within their assigned radius. He had built his life on this principle. It had never failed him. He had also, without knowing it, built a blind spot large enough to hide a conspiracy inside. The meeting with the financial advisors ran 40 minutes. 3 men in good suits sitting across a glass table, walking in Ho through the final stages of the Siacho transition with the careful energy of people who understood they were in the room with someone who did not accept imprecision. In Ho asked 4 questions. Each one landed with the specific weight of someone who had already thought 3 steps further than the answer being given. The advisors exchanged one glance across the table, the kind of glance that said he already knows, and recalibrated their presentation accordingly. By 8:47 the meeting was over. In-ho had signed 2 documents and deferred one pending a clause revision he'd identified in paragraph 9 that his own legal team had missed. He noted this without satisfaction. Competence was not something he celebrated. It was the baseline requirement for being in the room. He stood at the window again at 9:00, second espresso, watching the city fill in below him. Delivery trucks, commuters, the particular choreography of a Tuesday morning working itself out at street level. From up here it looked orderly, purposeful, a system doing what systems do. His phone buzzed, a message from the legal team confirming the secure line for the afternoon call. He replied with a single word, confirmed, and set the phone face down on the desk. At 9:15, Victor passed the office window in the hallway outside, speaking quietly into his earpiece. In-ho watched him for a moment through the glass, not with suspicion, simply with the passive attention of a man who monitors his environment the way other people breathe, automatically, without deciding to. Victor had been with him 6 years, had come up through the security structure during the hardest period of the operation's expansion, when loyalty was tested in ways that left marks. He was efficient, tactical, and completely without the emotional softness that In-ho found exhausting in other people. In-ho looked away, returned to his desk. If he had kept watching, if he had been the kind of man who trusted instinct over data, who let a flicker of something register as worth examining, he might have noticed that Victor didn't look up at the office window the way he always did when he passed it. He always looked up, 6 years of habit, a small acknowledgement, barely perceptible, but consistent. The kind of micro-routine that accumulates between 2 people who have operated in proximity long enough. Today, Victor looked straight ahead. In-ho didn't notice. He was already reading the next document. By 2:00 p.m., the transition papers were signed. 14 years of a particular kind of life, reduced to signatures on 11 pages, witnessed and dated, and filed with people who would ensure their legality was unimpeachable. In-ho sat with the closed folder for exactly 30 seconds after the last advisor left the room, not out of sentimentality, but out of the professional habit of marking a transition before moving past it. Then he set the folder aside and opened the next one. At 4:30, his schedule was clear. He used the time to review the quarterly numbers on 3 of the legitimate holdings, a construction management firm, 2 hospitality properties, and a logistics company that had been underperforming for 6 months in a way that would require a personnel decision before the end of the quarter. He made notes. Clean, specific, actionable. No ambiguity. At 5:30, he straightened his desk, arranged the items on its surface with the minor precision that people who'd worked near him for years had learned not to comment on. His briefcase was packed and latched. His jacket was on. His watch read 5:31. 29 minutes. Everything was in order. It was always in order at this hour. This was the part of the day In-ho permitted himself the closest thing he allowed to comfort, the clean slide of a schedule completing itself, every item resolved, every variable accounted for. The car would be ready. The route was the same. Home at 6:15, as it had been every day for the past 2 years without exception. Precision, routine, control. He looked out the window one last time. The city was shifting into its evening register, lights coming on in the buildings below, the streets thickening with the end-of-day movement of people heading somewhere other than where they'd been. Normal, ordered, his. He picked up his briefcase. 28 minutes. Not 1 second of those 28 minutes concerned him. He had accounted for everything. What he had not accounted for was a 9-year-old girl in a red hoodie, who had just set her egg crates down in the loading dock below and gone very, very still. In-ho just signed away his old life, and the people who profited from that life have been watching the clock all day. Victor didn't look up at that window. One small break in 6 years of habit, and nobody caught it. Comment, clock, if you already see where this is going. The service elevator smelled like industrial cleaner and old cardboard. Tracy rode it alone, both hands on the cart, watching the floor numbers climb on the small scratched display above the doors. B2 to B1. The Grand Imperial's loading dock sat at basement level, accessible only through the service lane on the hotel's north side. The side that faced the alley, the side with no marble, no doorman, no guests arriving with luggage that cost more than Grandmother White's monthly feed bill. Just concrete and fluorescent light, and the particular organized chaos of a large kitchen receiving its afternoon inventory. She'd made this trip enough times to know the rhythm of it. The dock would have 2, maybe 3 other vendors finishing their drops before the 5:45 cutoff. The kitchen porter, a quiet man named Mr. Rowe, would be logging crates on his clipboard near the freight scale. The far bay would be stacked with produce boxes from the morning delivery that hadn't been shelved yet. And the overhead lights at the south end of the corridor, the long stretch connecting the dock to the kitchen's prep area, would be flickering the way they'd been flickering for 6 weeks, because nobody who worked down here had the authority to requisition a maintenance order, and nobody above them thought to ask. The elevator opened. Tracy pulled her cart through and headed for Bay 3, which was hers by informal assignment, the smallest bay, closest to the freight scale, farthest from the main kitchen access. Exactly where a poultry delivery from a small family operation belonged in the hierarchy of the Grand Imperial's supply chain. She checked her watch, 5:43. 17 minutes until the chef's sign-off window closed. She moved fast, pulling the first crate from the cart and carrying it to the bay shelf with both arms, the weight of it pulling at her shoulders. Set it down clean. No rattling. Grandmother White had packed them tight enough that not a single egg had shifted on the bus ride over, which meant Tracy had done the strapping right, which meant, she allowed herself this, she was getting better at the parts that used to be hard. Second crate. She hoisted it, turned, and that was when she heard the voices. They were coming from the south corridor. The long, flickering stretch that ran between the dock and the prep area, the part of the basement that had no cameras. She'd noticed the dead mount on the wall 3 weeks ago, the bracket empty, the wire capped. Another maintenance request that had never traveled far enough up the chain to matter. 2 voices first, then a third. Low and fast, overlapping the way people talk when they're not performing a conversation but having one, when the words are functional, not social. Her brain caught the language before her ears fully processed the sounds. Arabic. She stood with the second crate in her arms and did not move. Not because she was making a decision. Because her body made one for her, the particular stillness of a person who understands that the wrong movement at the wrong moment turns a witness into a target. Her father had never taught her that lesson directly, but the language he'd given her had just activated something older than instruction. She set the crate down, slowly, without sound. The voices were clearer now. 3 men, she was certain, 2 she didn't recognize and 1 she did, though it took her a moment to place it because the register was wrong. Victor, In-ho's security chief, spoke to hotel staff in the flat, authoritative tone of a man who expected compliance. What she was hearing now was different. Looser. The Arabic of someone speaking to equals or to people he'd chosen and paid and was now confirming a sequence with. She pressed her back against the bay shelf and listened. The device is secured. First voice, clipped professional, checked it at 4, it's clean. Position, Victor. Under the driver's seat. Left side, toward the rear. Remote activation, range is sufficient from the building across the street. Tracy's hands were flat against the shelf behind her. The metal was cold through her work gloves. Timing confirmation, Victor said. 6 o'clock, he doesn't deviate. A pause. When he opens the door, we activate. You'll have visual confirmation from the lobby feed. And the sequence if the primary fails. The third voice answered. She hadn't heard it speak yet. It was quieter than the other two, measured in the way of someone who has done this kind of work long enough to have stopped being agitated by it. It won't fail. But if it does, I'm across the street. I have eyes on the car from the moment he exits the elevator. Good, Victor's voice dropped slightly. Nobody in this building speaks Arabic. We're clean. A sound, someone shifting weight, a jacket moving, the soft scrape of a shoe on concrete. They were close. 20 feet, maybe less, just around the bend in the south corridor, where the flickering lights threw uneven shadows across the floor. Tracy looked at the gap between the bay shelf and the wall. 8 inches, maybe. Enough if she turned sideways and didn't breathe wrong. She moved into it. The shelf pressed against her shoulder blades. The wall pressed against her chest. Between the two, she was a 9-year-old girl in a red hoodie with her eyes fixed on the corridor bend, and her father's Arabic running translations through her head, so fast it felt like a second voice inside her own. Device, driver's seat, remote detonation. When he opens the door. 6 o'clock. She knew that car. She'd seen it every time she came through the service lane, the black sedan parked at the front curb, always the same spot, always gleaming, the kind of car that had someone whose entire job was making sure it stayed gleaming. She'd seen In-ho get into it once, from a distance, on a Thursday 3 months ago when she'd been running late and had to cut through the lobby corridor to reach the freight elevator faster. He'd been walking toward the exit with 2 men flanking him and his briefcase in his right hand, and the particular momentum of someone for whom the world arranges itself in advance. She hadn't registered it as significant at the time. It was just the owner of the hotel, living the life of the owner of the hotel. Now she was translating a conversation about a device under that car's driver's seat, and a man with a sightline from across the street, and a remote trigger ready for the moment In-ho's hand touched the door handle. Her watch read 5:45. 15 minutes. The voices in the corridor shifted, someone saying something low she couldn't catch, and then the sound of footsteps. Moving, away from her back toward the prep area access, which meant they were going deeper into the building, not toward the dock. She stayed in the gap until the footsteps were gone. Then she stayed 10 seconds longer. Then she stepped out, and her legs felt wrong, not weak exactly, but recalibrated, like her body had already accepted that whatever came next was going to require a different kind of moving than hauling egg crates. She looked at her cart, 1 crate still on it, undelivered. The clipboard with the delivery slip was in her front pocket. She needed the chef's signature. She needed to complete the drop. That was the job, that was the contract, that was the thing keeping her grandmother's lights on, and the feed supplier paid, and the orange notebook from tipping permanently into the red column. She needed to do all of that, and she had 15 minutes to do it. And she had just overheard 3 men plan an assassination in Arabic in the basement of the building she was standing in. Her father's voice came to her then. Not a memory she reached for, one that arrived on its own, the way his voice sometimes did when she played the tapes enough that it started living in the room with her. Even the smallest chick makes noise enough to wake the whole yard, baby girl. She grabbed the 3rd crate. She had to move. She had to think. She had to get upstairs and find someone who would listen to a 9-year-old egg delivery girl tell them that a bomb had been placed under the most powerful man in the building's car, set to detonate in 15 minutes, coordinated by the head of his own security team, in a language nobody up there knew she understood. She had to do all of this while looking like she was just finishing a delivery. Mr. Rowe was at the freight scale with his clipboard when Tracy came around the bay with the 3rd crate. He looked up, marked something, looked back down. "Last one," he said. "Last one," she said. Her voice came out normal. She didn't know how. He logged the crate, handed her the weight slip, told her the chef would do the final sign-off at the kitchen pass-through, same as always. He said it with the boredom of someone running a procedure they've run 500 times. Tracy took the slip and nodded and turned toward the freight elevator and did not run, because running in the dock meant a dropped crate, meant broken eggs, meant a compromised delivery, meant a conversation she could not afford to have right now. She walked. The elevator took 19 seconds to arrive. She counted them. Inside it, alone, she let herself press both palms flat against the metal wall and breathe 3 times. In through the nose, the way her father had taught her when the world got too loud. And on the 3rd exhale, she made the decision that had actually been made the moment she heard the words when he opens the door. She was going to warn him. Not because Jian and Ho had ever once looked at her like she was a person. Not because the hotel contract made him important to her family, though it did. Not because she had calculated the outcome and determined that intervention was the logical response. Because she was standing in an elevator with the knowledge of what was going to happen in 14 minutes, and doing nothing with that knowledge was not something she could make herself be. Her father had a word for that, too. He'd said it in Arabic first, then translated it for her when she was 6 years old, sitting at the kitchen table with a boiled egg between them and the cassette player running in the background. Demir, he'd said, it means conscience. It means the part of you that knows the right thing before your brain finishes arguing about it. The elevator opened at the kitchen level. Tracy stepped out. 14 minutes. She heard every word. Victor said nobody in that building speaks Arabic, and he was wrong about exactly one person. Drop a heart if Tracy just became the most important person in the Grand Imperial Hotel. She still has one unsigned delivery slip, a chef who doesn't want to be interrupted, and 14 minutes to reach a man who has never learned her name. Comment, Doc, if you need to know how she gets through that kitchen door. The kitchen hit her like a wall. Not the door, the kitchen itself. The heat first, the kind that doesn't build gradually but arrives all at once the moment you cross the threshold, pressing against your face and forearms like something with intention. Then the noise, 6 burners running, 2 ovens, the industrial dishwasher cycling through its rinse sequence in the back corner, someone calling a ticket, someone else calling back, a pan hitting a metal surface hard enough that Tracy's shoulders jumped before she could stop them. She stood at the pass-through entrance with her delivery slip in one hand and 13 minutes on her watch, and let herself take exactly 2 seconds to locate the chef. He was at the center island, where he always was. A tall man with a permanent lean forward, like he was always in the middle of correcting something, his white coat marked with the evidence of a full-service shift. His attention moving between 3 plates, he was arranging with the focused intensity of someone who considered everything outside his immediate sightline to be someone else's problem. Tracy moved toward him. She kept her path straight, close to the wall, the way she'd learned. Kitchen staff moved in established channels, and the fastest way to create a problem in a working kitchen was to interrupt the flow of those channels. She'd been told this on her 3rd delivery, not kindly, by a sous chef who nearly walked into her with a sheet pan. She'd never made the same mistake again. She reached the edge of the center island. The chef didn't look up. Delivery slip, she said, for the egg order, Bay 3. He held out his hand without looking at her. She put the slip in it. He glanced at it for half a second, reached for the pen clipped to his collar, and that was when Tracy spoke again. Chef, I need to tell you something important. The pen stopped moving. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 2 degrees, despite the 6 running burners. He looked up. The expression on his face was not anger yet. It was the compressed pre-anger of a man who has been operating at maximum capacity for 6 hours and has just registered an unexpected variable in his controlled environment. Sign this, he said, flat, final. There are men in the loading dock. I heard them talking about. Sign this and go. He pushed the slip back across the island toward her. Chef, please, they have something under Mr. Inho's car. They said 6 o'clock. He set the pen down. This was worse than if he'd raised his voice. The deliberate setting down of the pen was the action of a man shifting from impatient to something more considered and significantly less forgiving. You are a delivery vendor, he said, each word its own sentence. You are not staff. You are not security. You come in through Bay 3, you drop your crates, you get your slip signed, and you leave through the service elevator. That is the entirety of your function in this building. I know, but do you understand what happens to your grandmother's contract if I pick up that phone right now? He didn't gesture at a phone. He didn't need to. Do you understand how quickly I can end an arrangement that this hotel extends as a courtesy to a small local supplier?" The word courtesy landed like something thrown. Tracy felt it, felt the specific shape of it, the way it reduced 14 months of reliable, careful, punctual deliveries to something that could be revoked on a mood. She felt her grandmother at the kitchen window on Delmont Street, watching the clock, waiting for the bus to appear at the corner. She picked up the signed slip. "There's a bomb," she said quietly. "Under his car, they said when he opens the door." The chef looked at her for 3 full seconds. The kind of look that isn't reading you but categorizing you, deciding which folder to put you in. She watched him move her from interruption to unstable child to liability in real time. "Get out of my kitchen," he said. "And if you're not at the service elevator in the next 60 seconds, I'm calling dock security." She was back in the corridor before she'd decided to move. The door swung shut behind her, and the kitchen noise became muffled. And then the fluorescent hum of the service hallway was the only sound, and Tracy stood with her back against the wall, and the signed slip in her hand, and 12 minutes on her watch, and a very specific understanding of her situation. The chef wasn't going to help. Dock security answered to Victor. The front desk answered to hotel management, which in an emergency would route through Victor. The guest service staff on the lobby level wouldn't stop for a delivery kid any more than the businessman on Delmont Street had stopped for 4 roses at $3 each. She needed to think past the obvious doors, because every obvious door in this building led back to the same locked room. Her father again, not the Arabic lessons this time, but something older. A Sunday afternoon, the two of them at the kitchen table with a puzzle that was missing 4 pieces, which they hadn't discovered until they were nearly finished. Tracy had wanted to quit. What's the point if it's already broken? And he turned the box over and looked at it from the underside and said, "The missing pieces don't change what's already connected. Work with what's there." What was there? She had a signed delivery slip, which meant she'd fulfilled her vendor obligation and had legitimate reason to be in the building until she exited through the service elevator. She had a red hoodie that every staff member in this building associated with the egg delivery kid, which meant she was furniture, and furniture could move through spaces without triggering the same alarm that a stranger would. She had Arabic, which was the only reason any of this mattered, and she had 11 minutes and 50 seconds. She had one more thing. She'd seen In-Ho's schedule posted on the internal board near the freight manager's station 3 weeks ago when she'd been waiting for Mr. Rowe to finish a call, not intentionally. Just the habit of a kid who read everything in her eyeline because her father had taught her that too. The board had listed the owner's standard departure as 5:50 from the 41st floor, 6:00 car entry, lobby transit roughly 4 minutes. Which meant In-Ho would be in the lobby elevator bank at approximately 5:56. Which meant if she could reach the lobby, the actual lobby, not the service corridor, not the kitchen level, the marble-end chandelier front of house that she had never once set foot in during 14 months of deliveries, she could intercept him before he reached the car. The lobby was 4 floors up and 1 world away. The service stairwell connected B1 to the lobby level without passing through any staffed checkpoints, which Tracy knew because she'd used the first 2 floors of it once when the freight elevator was running slow, and she'd needed to check something with Mr. Rowe's manager. She'd only gone as far as the ground floor service access, the door that opened behind the laundry station, well away from any guest-facing area. But the stairwell continued up. She found the door, pushed through it, and started climbing. The stairwell was concrete and institutional and indifferent, the hidden skeleton of a building that presented an entirely different face to the people it wanted to impress. Her sneakers on the steps were the only sound. She passed the ground floor service access and kept going, and the quality of the air changed slightly, and the door at the top of the next flight had a small rectangle of reinforced glass set into it at adult eye level. She stood on her toes and looked through. The lobby. Even compressed through a 4-inch rectangle of scratched glass, it was a different atmosphere entirely. The ceiling was high enough to make the chandelier above the central seating area look proportional, which meant the chandelier was enormous. The floor was dark marble, polished to the kind of finish that reflected movement. 2 staff members at the front desk, a concierge near the entrance, 2 guests with luggage near the elevator bank. And standing at the edge of the elevator bank, speaking into his earpiece with his back to the lobby entrance, Victor. Tracy dropped below the glass. Her back hit the door and she pressed herself against it, the cold of the stairwell suddenly more present than it had been 30 seconds ago. He was already down here. He'd come from the dock level. He must have taken the staff elevator while she was in the kitchen. He was positioned at the elevator bank, which meant he had eyes on the exact point wherein Ho would emerge from the upper floors. Which meant he'd also have eyes on the lobby door she was standing behind. She checked her watch. 5:53. 7 minutes. And Victor was standing between her and the only person she needed to reach. She made herself breathe, in through the nose. The kitchen sounds were completely gone now, replaced by the muffled elegance of lobby acoustics filtering through the door, distant piano from somewhere, the soft collision of wheeled luggage on marble, voices at a register that guests paid to exist in. Victor hadn't seen her. She was certain of that. The glass was small and scratched, and she'd been below it in under a second. But certain and safe were 2 different things, and the distance between them was shrinking with every minute she stayed in the stairwell deciding instead of moving. She thought about the loading dock, about the gap between the shelf and the wall, about the 8 inches of space that had hidden her from 3 men who were confident nobody in the building could understand them. Invisible had protected her once already today. The question was whether she could be invisible in a lobby she had no business being in, wearing a red hoodie that every staff member on the service side recognized, carrying a signed delivery slip for a completed egg drop, with Victor 12 feet from the door she needed to open, and 7 minutes left on a clock that only she knew was running. She looked at the stairwell, looked at the door, looked at her watch. The answer she arrived at was not comfortable, but it was the only one available, and her father's word came back to her, Demir, the part that knows before the brain finishes arguing. She straightened her hoodie, tucked the delivery slip into her front pocket, put both hands flat against the door. Victor was standing at the elevator bank. Ho would walk out of that elevator in approximately 3 minutes. And Tracy was going to have to get past one to reach the other in a lobby where a 9-year-old egg delivery girl had exactly 0 reasons to exist. She pushed the door open and walked through. Victor is already in position and Tracy just walked into the one place in this building she was never supposed to be. He hasn't seen her yet, but the lobby has no shadows, no shelf gaps, no service corridors to disappear into. Drop a heart if your chest is tight right now. She has 7 minutes, a signed egg slip, and a red hoodie that makes her anything but invisible. Comment, lobby, if you need to see how she gets past Victor. She made it 4 steps into the lobby before Victor turned. Not toward her, toward the front entrance, where a guest was making enough noise about a luggage cart to pull the attention of everyone within 20 feet. Tracy used those 4 steps to change direction without breaking stride, moving left instead of forward, the way her body decided before her mind confirmed it, and she was through the side door marked staff only hospitality level before Victor's head finished its turn. The door closed behind her, with a sound like a held breath releasing. She was in a service corridor she didn't recognize, narrower than the dock-level halls, better lit, running parallel to the lobby's west wall. Linen carts, a housekeeping station, a row of labeled storage doors on the right side, each one marked with a department and a temperature rating. She looked at her watch, 5:54. 6 minutes. And she was moving in the wrong direction. She pressed her back against the corridor wall and made herself be still for 3 seconds, because moving fast in the wrong direction was its own kind of trap, and her father had taught her that too. A river doesn't get to the sea faster by rushing into a wall. Victor hadn't seen her. She was still invisible. But the lobby was now behind a door with Victor on the other side of it, and 6 minutes was not a number that left room for another wrong turn. She looked at the storage doors. The third one from the end read, "Kitchen overflow, cold storage, keep sealed." And beneath that, a temperature placard, -18 degrees. A walk-in freezer. She didn't plan to stay long. That wasn't why she went in. She went in because the housekeeping attendant she'd spotted at the far end of the corridor had turned around and was pushing her cart back in Tracy's direction, and the only options were the freezer or the linen room, and the linen room had a light on underneath the door that suggested it wasn't empty. The freezer handle was a heavy lever pull, the kind designed for adult hands. Tracy used both of hers, planted her feet, and pulled. The seal broke with a soft, pressurized exhale, and the cold hit her the way the kitchen heat had hit her, immediately, completely, without negotiation. She stepped inside and pulled the lever closed behind her. The freezer was larger than she expected. Industrial shelving ran along both walls, stacked with labeled containers, portion proteins, vacuum-sealed stocks, backup dairy in quantities that made sense for a hotel kitchen serving 300 covers a night. A single overhead strip light ran the length of the ceiling, throwing everything in pale blue-white. The floor was metal grating over drainage channels. Her breath appeared in front of her face the moment she exhaled. She checked her watch. 5:55. 1 minute had passed since she'd left the stairwell. 5 minutes remaining. She pressed her hands under her arms for warmth and stood between two shelving units and thought about the lobby layout the way she'd seen it through the stairwell glass. Elevator bank on the east wall, front entrance on the north, the concierge station mid-floor, the seating area center. Victor had been standing at the elevator bank's edge, which gave him sightlines to the elevator doors and the main lobby floor, but created a blind spot along the west wall near the hospitality corridor entrance. If she came back through that door and moved immediately left, staying close to the west wall, she could reach the seating area's far side before Victor's natural sightline would pick her up. From there, the elevator bank was maybe 30 feet of open marble. 30 feet of open marble in a red hoodie with no cover, and a man who coordinated assassinations standing between her and the target. Her fingers were going numb. She tucked them tighter. The sound that came then wasn't a sound from the freezer. It was internal, the particular quality of silence pressing hard enough against a person that the things they carry inside them start to become audible. Her father's voice, not a specific sentence at first, just the register of it, low, patient, the particular warmth of a man who never spoke to her like she was small even when she was at her smallest. Then a specific morning. She'd been 6. A Tuesday, she thought, though she wasn't certain. He'd been playing one of the Arabic tapes at the kitchen table, and she'd gotten frustrated, the pronunciation of a particular sound that didn't exist in English, a consonant that lived somewhere at the back of the throat and kept coming out wrong no matter how many times she tried. She'd pushed the tape player away. I can't do it. I keep doing it wrong. He hadn't moved the tape player back toward her. He just sat with the wrongness of the moment the way he sat with most hard things, without rushing to fix it, without pretending it was easier than it was. Courage isn't the absence of the thing that's stopping you, he'd said finally. It's doing the next thing anyway, just the next thing, not all of it, one thing. She'd asked him where he'd learned that. Your grandfather, he'd said, his father before him, it's old. It travels in the blood. She'd tried the sound again, still wrong, but less wrong than before. He'd smiled at that. There it is. The cold had moved past her hands now and was working on her forearms. She needed to leave the freezer. She knew that, but the shape of what was waiting outside it, the lobby, the marble, Victor, the clock, kept her planted for 30 more seconds while her father's voice finished what it had started. Just the next thing. The next thing was not reaching in Ho. The next thing was not getting past Victor. The next thing was not the 30 feet of open marble or the elevator bank or the bomb beneath the driver's seat that a man in a building across the street was waiting to trigger at the precise moment a hand touched a door handle. The next thing was walking back out of this freezer. That was all, just that one thing. She'd grown up watching her grandmother work the yard in the dark before sunrise, moving between the pens with a feed bucket in each hand like the cold and the dark and the weight of it were simply conditions of the morning, rather than hardships worth nomming. She'd grown up watching that woman open the orange notebook to the column that was losing and make her marks without flinching, because flinching didn't change the numbers, and the numbers still needed to be faced. Courage in her family didn't announce itself. It just kept moving. Her father had learned Arabic from his father and taught it to his daughter in a kitchen on Delmont Street with a tape player and boiled eggs and patience that never ran out. And 3 years after an accident took him off the earth entirely, that language was sitting in a 9-year-old girl's chest in a hotel freezer in the middle of a city that had never once looked at her. And it was the only thing standing between a man's life and the clock on her watch. Demir, he'd said, the part that knows before the brain finishes arguing. Her brain had finished arguing. She pulled the freezer lever and stepped back into the corridor. The warmth of the hallway hit her frozen skin, and she kept moving, not pausing to feel it, because pausing was a luxury she'd used up. The housekeeping attendant was gone. The corridor was clear. She checked her watch. 5:57. 3 minutes. In the lobby beyond the staff door. She could hear the ambient sound of the front of house, the piano, the luggage wheels, the controlled murmur of a hotel presenting itself to people who expected a certain quality of everything. In-Ho's elevator would open at approximately 5:59 based on the departure time she'd seen on that board 3 weeks ago, the detail she hadn't known she was storing. Her father would have said something about that, too. About paying attention to the world around you not because you're looking for anything specific, but because the world has a habit of handing you exactly what you need at the moment you need it, provided you've been watching. She'd been watching. 3 minutes. Victor at the elevator bank. 30 feet of open marble and a red hoodie that made her the most visible thing in a lobby designed for invisibility of a completely different kind. The invisible architecture of wealth that made everything look effortless and concealed all the machinery underneath. She understood that architecture now better than anyone in that lobby. She was the machinery underneath. Tracy White pulled her hood down. The red would be less of a flag without the hood framing her face, she decided. Just a kid in a red zip-up which was at least marginally less conspicuous, and put her hand on the staff door. Through it, muffled but present, she heard the elevator chime. Not the service elevator, the main bank, the sound that meant a car had arrived at lobby level from the upper floors. 5:58. She hadn't accounted for early. She'd calculated on the schedule, and he was running 2 minutes ahead, and the door between her and the lobby was the only thing separating that timing from complete collapse. Her hand tightened on the handle. 2 minutes early meant Victor was about to move from his position at the elevator bank's edge to receive In-Ho, which meant his sightline was shifting, which meant the window she'd been planning for had just rearranged itself into something she hadn't mapped. Just the next thing. She pushed the door open. She's out of the freezer, out of time, and In-Ho's elevator just arrived 2 minutes early. Victor is moving. The 30 feet of open marble is no longer the problem. Getting to In-Ho before Victor positions himself between them is. Drop a heart if Tracy's father just gave her exactly what she needed. Comment, heritage, if you believe the smallest voice can stop a war. The lobby was bigger from the inside. That was the first thing. Through the stairwell glass it had looked manageable, a defined rectangle of marble and light with identifiable positions and calculable distances. Standing inside it, even just inside the staff door with her back still close to the wall, the scale of it reorganized itself around her. The ceiling climbed. The chandelier expanded. The marble floor stretched in every direction with the kind of confident permanence that said this space was built to make certain people feel significant and everyone else feel the precise opposite. Tracy felt the precise opposite. She had approximately 4 seconds before her stillness became more conspicuous than her movement, so she moved. Left, close to the west wall. Hood down, delivery slip in her front pocket, chin level, not up, which would look desperate, not down, which would look guilty. Level. Her grandmother's word for how you carried yourself when the world was trying to make you small. You don't look up like you're asking permission, and you don't look down like you've already been denied. You look straight ahead like you already belong wherever you're going. The west wall had a long decorative console table running its length, topped with arrangements of white flowers in vessels that probably cost more than a month of feed grain. Tracy used it the way she used the beige shelves in the dock. as the edge of a channel, a defined line to move along, something that gave her path logic even if that logic was entirely self-constructed. She did not look at the elevator bank. Looking at Victor was the fastest way to pull Victor's attention, and she understood this the way she understood kitchen traffic flow, through observation, through the accumulated intelligence of being somewhere often enough to learn its patterns without anyone teaching them to her. She looked at the far end of the console table. Just that, the next thing. 10 feet. 12. The piano was coming from a small raised area near the front entrance. A man in a dark jacket playing something without sheet music, his attention on the middle distance the way musicians get when the playing has become automatic and the mind has gone somewhere else entirely. 2 guests on the central seating area sofas, one of them on a phone call, neither looking at anything except their own immediate world. The concierge at his station, near the entrance, was writing something, head down. 15 feet covered. She allowed herself one peripheral check of the elevator bank. Victor had moved from his position at the edge. He was now closer to the elevator doors themselves, 4 feet in front of them, hands clasped, facing the doors directly. His earpiece caught the chandelier light on its small, curved surface. His posture had shifted from the loose watchfulness of a man maintaining a position to the collected readiness of a man expecting an arrival. In-Ho's elevator was about to open. Tracy was still 20 feet from the bank and on the wrong side of the lobby floor. She left the wall. There was no version of the remaining geometry that let her stay along the west wall and reach In-Ho before the elevator doors opened. So she left it and moved onto the open marble, and the lobby floor expanded around her like a held note, suddenly aware of her. Or so it felt, the way large spaces sometimes feel aware of the thing that doesn't belong inside them. Her sneakers on the marble made a sound, not loud, but present in a way that her rubber-soled dock shoes on concrete had never been. A soft, rhythmic contact that felt to her like an announcement. She was halfway across the open floor when the elevator chimed. The doors parted. Jian In-Ho stepped out. Briefcase in his right hand, jacket perfectly set. The particular momentum she'd seen once before from a corridor distance. The forward gravity of a man for whom the world arranges itself in advance, who does not slow for thresholds or transitions because slowing is a form of uncertainty, and uncertainty is something he'd excised from his operating system 14 years ago. Behind him, 2 members of his personal security, not Victor's mercenaries, the regular detail, men she recognized from previous delivery days, fell into position at his flanks with the practiced ease of people who had made this exact walk dozens of times. Victor turned from the elevator doors, and his eyes swept the lobby in the automatic threat assessment pattern of a security professional, left, right, center, perimeter, and landed on Tracy. He didn't recognize her immediately. She could see it, the half-second of categorization, the same filing process the chef had done, moving her from unknown element to identifiable non-threat. The red zip-up, the work gloves still on her hands, the size of her. The egg girl. She watched him, decide she wasn't relevant. He looked away. In-Ho was walking toward the front entrance, toward the car, toward the curb where a gleaming black sedan was idling with a device beneath the driver's seat and a man in a building across the street watching a remote trigger. Tracy ran. Not a panicked run. She didn't have the luxury of panic because panic was noise and noise would bring the wrong kind of attention before she reached him. So it was a controlled run, the kind she used when she was late for the bus and carrying something fragile, purposeful, feet landing correctly, arms driving without flailing. It still looked like a child sprinting across a luxury hotel lobby in a red zip-up and work gloves. The concierge looked up. One of the lobby security staff near the entrance, a broad-shouldered man she hadn't clocked on her initial scan, stationed beside the revolving door, straightened from his lean and took a step forward, his hand moving toward the radio at his belt. "Hey," his voice carried across the marble. "Hey, stop." In-Ho didn't slow. He was 6 feet from the entrance. Tracy was 12 feet from In-Ho. The lobby security guard was moving now, cutting an angle from the entrance toward her, his trajectory designed to intercept before she reached the front. He was bigger and longer strided and operating on a surface he knew. She had one advantage. He was watching her face, tracking where her eyes were pointed, anticipating a straight line, because people running toward something run straight. She cut left. Not dramatically. 2 feet of adjustment, enough to shift the intercept geometry, enough to buy 3 more strides before he recalculated. She'd learned this in the schoolyard, which was not the same as a luxury hotel lobby, but operated on identical principles when someone bigger was trying to catch someone smaller. 5 feet from In-ho. The lobby security guard's hand closed on the back of her zip-up. She didn't stop. The zip-up stretched, her momentum pulled against his grip, and she twisted, the same instinctive rotation she used when a crate shifted wrong on the cart, and she needed to redirect the weight before it fell. And the zip-up's collar pulled taut and released, and she was through, one sleeve half off her shoulder, and her hand caught the back of In-ho's jacket. She grabbed it. The world stopped. Not literally. The piano kept playing. The lobby kept existing. The revolving door kept revolving. But In-ho stopped, which meant his security detail stopped, which meant the lobby security guard behind her stopped with his hand still extended from where her zip-up had escaped it, and Victor, who had dismissed her 30 seconds ago as the egg girl, turned from his position near the entrance and went completely, dangerously still. In-ho looked down. Not the look she'd imagined in the freezer, when she'd been steeling herself for whatever his face would do. This was something she hadn't anticipated, not cold dismissal, not the absent look-through she'd been on the receiving end of before. He looked down the way a man looks when something has genuinely surprised him, which meant something had breached the perimeter of the controlled world he'd built, and the breach was a 9-year-old girl with one sleeve off her shoulder and her hand wrapped in the fabric of his jacket. His security detail moved, both men stepping in, hands out. "Don't," In-ho's voice, one word, they stopped. He looked at her. The neck tattoos were visible above his collar at close range, the edge of something dark and deliberate, the kind of mark a younger version of himself had put on his body when permanence still felt like power. His eyes were exactly what she'd expected from a distance. But distance had been doing work she hadn't accounted for up close. Something in them was less finished than she'd imagined. A man who had spent 14 years removing sentiment from his operating system was still, at the foundation, a man. "You're the delivery girl," he said, not a question. "Yes," her voice held, she didn't know how. "I need you to listen to me right now." "Let go of my jacket." "Not yet." She heard Victor's footsteps behind her, measured, closing. "Your security chief, Victor, he has men at this hotel. They put something under your car, under the driver's seat, remote detonation. They're waiting across the street, and when you open that door." "That's enough." Victor's hand landed on her shoulder, firm and final, the grip of a man terminating a situation. "Sir, I apologize, I don't know how she got up here. I'll have her removed." She didn't look at Victor. She kept her eyes on In-ho's face, and she said the next thing, the only thing left, the thing her father's language had been traveling toward through 3 years of cassette tapes and kitchen mornings, and a walk-in freezer at -18 degrees. She said it in Arabic. Not the warning. Not yet. She said the specific phrase Victor had used in the loading dock, the operational confirmation between men who believed they were the only Arabic speakers in the building, the private language of a conspiracy conducted in plain sight. When he opens the door, the lobby security guard behind her went still. In-ho's expression didn't change, but something behind it did, some internal process rerouting, recalculating, pulling up a variable that didn't fit the existing model. He looked at her with the focused attention of a man who has just registered that the world contains something he hadn't accounted for. Then he looked at Victor. Victor's hand on her shoulder had stopped moving. The lobby was completely silent except for the piano, which continued playing because the musician's mind was somewhere else entirely, and no one had thought to signal him. 5 seconds, maybe 6. In-Ho's gaze moved from Victor's face to the revolving door to the front curb, where the black sedan was idling, and Tracy watched him do the math. The fast, ruthless arithmetic of a man who had built an empire on calculated risk and had just been handed a variable that rewrote the entire equation. He looked back at her. "How do you speak Arabic?" he said quietly. "My father taught me." She held his gaze. "He said languages are keys. I didn't know which doors I'd need to open." Victor's grip on her shoulder shifted, tightening, the adjustment of a man moving from containment to something with harder edges. And In-Ho saw it, and his eyes went flat in a way that had nothing to do with the cold arrogance she'd witnessed from a distance. This was different. This was a man who had just identified the snake in his own garden. "Take your hand off her," In-Ho said. Victor didn't move his hand. 3 seconds passed after In-Ho's instruction, and Victor's grip on Tracy's shoulder remained exactly where it was, not tightening further, not releasing, just present in the way of something that has decided the instruction doesn't apply to it. It was a small defiance, barely visible. The kind of thing that could be explained away as a half-second processing delay, a momentary lag between order and compliance. But In-Ho had built 14 years of empire on reading exactly this kind of small defiance. The micro-hesitation that preceded a larger move. The tell that appeared before the hand showed its cards. His eyes moved from Victor's face to Victor's hand and back. "I won't say it again," In-Ho said. Victor released her. His hand came off her shoulder slowly, not with the clean compliance of a man following an order, but with the careful deliberateness of a man buying seconds, recalculating, moving pieces on a board that had just changed configuration. He stepped back, clasped his hands in front of him. His face returned to the professional neutral that 6 years of service had made habitual. "Sir," he said, "with respect, the girl is a vendor. She comes in through the service entrance, whatever she's told you." "I haven't told him anything yet," Tracy said. Both men looked at her. She hadn't planned to say it, but it was true, and the truth of it reoriented the room, because Victor had started explaining before the full accusation had been made, and In-Ho was the kind of man who would notice exactly what that sequence indicated. In-Ho looked at Victor for one long moment. Then he looked at the lobby entrance, at the revolving door, at the visible edge of the curb beyond the glass where the black sedan was idling. His jaw moved almost imperceptibly. "Clear the lobby," he said to his security detail. Then to the lobby guard behind Tracy, "You too." "Sir, protocol requires." "I'm aware of what protocol requires. Flat, final, clear it." It took 90 seconds. The detail moved the 2 guests from the central seating area with the smooth efficiency of people trained to relocate human beings without making the relocation feel like what it was. The concierge disappeared through a side door. The lobby guard retreated to the entrance vestibule. The piano player, finally registering that something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, let his piece resolve to its natural end and did not begin another. The lobby went quiet. In-Ho, Tracy, and Victor stood in the resulting silence like 3 points of a triangle, the geometry between them doing all the work that words hadn't yet done. In-Ho set his briefcase down on the console table. The same table Tracy had used as her channel along the west wall 60 seconds ago. He straightened up, adjusted his jacket, and looked at her with the complete attention of a man who had temporarily suspended every other variable in his world. "Talk," he said. She talked. Not the way she'd rehearsed it in the freezer. There had been no rehearsal, only the understanding that the words existed and needed to move from inside her to outside her in the right sequence. She started with the loading dock. 5:43, Bay 3. The third crate on the cart and the voices from the south corridor and the language her brain had recognized before her ears had fully processed it. She told him what she'd heard. Verbatim in Arabic first, then translated, the device confirmed, the position beneath the driver's seat, the remote activation, the sightline from the building across the street, the backup plan Victor had indicated with his hand beneath his jacket. She told him the exact phrase, "When he opens the door." She told him the time, 6 o'clock. She looked at her watch as she said it. 5:59. 60 seconds. In-ho hadn't moved during any of it. Hadn't interrupted. Hadn't looked at Victor, which she understood was deliberate. He was giving Victor nothing to read. No signal of what the information was doing inside him. No indication of which way the equation was resolving. His face was doing what his face apparently did when the world handed him something that required his full processing capacity. It went still, completely, unnervingly still. When she finished, he was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he looked at Victor. Victor looked back at him with the face of a man who had prepared for this moment. Not this exact configuration of it, but the general shape of exposure. The moment when a plan that has been running invisibly surfaces into light. He'd had time during Tracy's account to run his own arithmetic. And what his arithmetic had produced was visible in the set of his shoulders and the quality of his stillness. Not guilt. Victor wasn't performing guilt. He was performing the next phase of the strategy, the version that accounted for the plan being known. "Sir," he said, his voice was steady. "This child came through a service entrance and overheard a security drill. We've been running Arabic language protocol tests to identify vulnerabilities in The device is under the driver's seat," In-ho said quietly. "Left side, toward the rear." Victor said nothing. That's a very specific detail for a 9-year-old to fabricate. In-ho picked up his phone from his jacket pocket, still watching Victor. It's also a very specific detail for a security drill to include. She could have seen something in the dock, misinterpreted. Remote detonation. In-ho's voice hadn't risen by a single degree. Range sufficient from the building across the street. Backup positioned at street level. These are operational specifics, Victor, not the vocabulary of a misinterpreted maintenance visit. The lobby clock on the wall, behind the concierge station, moved. 6:00. In-ho looked at it, then at the revolving door, then at the sedan at the curb, idling, the driver visible through the windshield in the practiced stillness of someone doing exactly what they'd been told to do and nothing else. Tracy watched In-ho's face process the reality of it. 6 o'clock. The car running, the device waiting, the man across the street watching through whatever sightline he'd established. His thumb near a trigger for a sequence that had been planned and coordinated and almost perfectly executed. Almost. Victor moved. Not toward In-ho. Away, toward the lobby entrance, the specific purposeful movement of a man executing a contingency, and his hand went to his jacket in the motion Tracy had heard him describe in the loading dock, the backup plan. And suddenly the theoretical weight she'd assigned to those words in the freezer became physical and present and very close. In-ho's security detail came through the side door before Victor's hand completed its reach. Not because they'd been watching, but because In-ho's thumb had moved on his phone screen during Victor's first step, a single-cent signal that brought both men through the door at a speed that said they'd been positioned just outside it, waiting for exactly this. Victor stopped. His hand was still inside his jacket. The two detail members were positioned at his flanks, with the practiced geometry of people trained to contain rather than escalate, close enough to be definitive, calibrated enough to leave Victor one choice about how the next 10 seconds resolved. The lobby held its breath. "Your hand," In-ho said, slowly. Victor's jaw was working. His eyes moved across the room, detail members, In-ho, Tracy, the entrance behind him, the math of each option running fast behind his face. 6 years of working for a man who made decisions with the speed and finality of someone who had never once flinched had not made Victor a man who flinched easily. But the geometry wasn't there. The room had already resolved against him, and he was experienced enough to know it. His hand came out of his jacket empty. The detail moved. Efficient, practiced, 2 sets of hands and Victor's arms behind his back before the exhale had finished, and the gun that had been under his jacket was removed and secured, and Victor was contained against the lobby's west wall with his face turned toward the marble, and 6 years of calculated betrayal arriving at its terminus in the same lobby where he'd stood every evening for half a decade, watching his employer walk to a car he just tried to destroy. In-ho made 2 more calls, 30 seconds apart. His voice was level on both of them, the voice of a man issuing instructions he's already thought through, removing variables, initiating sequences. The first call lasted 40 seconds. The second, 20. He put the phone in his pocket. Then he turned and looked at Tracy. She was standing where she'd been standing for the last 4 minutes, beside the console table with its white flowers, her zip-up half off one shoulder from where the lobby guard's grip had pulled it, her work gloves still on because she hadn't thought to remove them, the signed delivery slip still in her front pocket from a completed egg drop that felt like it had happened in a different chapter of a different story entirely. In-ho crossed the lobby toward her. His detail had Victor secured. The room was quiet except for the residual tension that large events leave in spaces after they've occurred. A kind of atmospheric charge, the air still processing what had moved through it. He stopped in front of her. Up close, without the emergency of the previous 4 minutes organizing her attention elsewhere, she registered him differently. Not the Ice King from a corridor distance. Not the abstraction of a powerful man who'd never learned her name. A person. 34 years old, neck tattoos, eyes that had gone through their own stillness and come out the other side of it into something that didn't have a clean category. He looked at her for a long moment. "You came through the service entrance," he said, not an accusation, a fact being placed carefully. "Bay 3, she said, "Tuesdays and Thursdays." "The eggs." "Yes." He was quiet. His eyes moved to the revolving door again, to the car at the curb, which would not be opened by anyone until the people he'd called arrived and confirmed what was beneath the driver's seat. From across the street, a man with a remote trigger was watching a door that was not going to open. Eventually, that man would understand that the sequence had failed and would make a decision about what came next, and the people In-ho had called would be ready for that decision. All of that was in motion now, set going by a phone call made in a lobby by a man who'd been 30 seconds from a car door. 30 seconds, and a 9-year-old girl who spoke Arabic, because her father had believed that languages were keys, and you couldn't know in advance which doors you'd need to open. In-ho looked back at her. "Your grandmother," he said, "the poultry farm." Tracy nodded. "She doesn't know you're still here." "She's watching the clock," Tracy said. "She worries when I'm late." Something moved across In-ho's face. Not the micro-expressions she'd been tracking for the last 20 minutes. Something slower and less managed. The kind of thing that surfaces when a person's system has been running on pure calculation, and something cuts through the calculation to the layer underneath. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced his phone, held it out to her. "Call her," he said. "Tell her you're safe." Tracy took the phone. Her grandmother answered on the second ring, and Tracy said, "I'm okay, Grandma. I'm on my way," in the steady voice of someone who had just discovered that steady was something she could be when the situation required it. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving through it, one thing at a time, the way courage had always traveled in her family. She handed the phone back. In-ho looked at her with an expression she didn't have a word for yet. She thought she might later, when the evening had settled and she was back on Delmont Street and the cassette tapes were playing and she had time to find the right language for it. "You came back," he said. "You could have left the building." "I know," she said. "Why didn't you?" She thought about the freezer, about her father's voice in the cold, about Damir and the part that knows before the brain finishes arguing. "Because knowing and doing nothing are the same thing," she said. "My dad told me that." The first vehicle arrived in 4 minutes. No sirens. That was the thing Tracy noticed. She'd expected sirens, the way emergencies arrived in the world she knew, loud and announcing themselves from 2 streets away. But these vehicles came quietly. 2 dark SUVs pulling into the hotel's service lane from opposite ends of the block, their movements coordinated in the way of people who had rehearsed this kind of arrival enough times that the rehearsal had become instinct. A third vehicle, unmarked, lower to the ground, parked directly across the street from the hotel entrance at an angle that gave its occupants a sightline to the building facade opposite. In-ho watched from the lobby's interior. He hadn't moved toward the entrance. He'd positioned himself at the west wall beside the console table, the same wall Tracy had moved along 12 minutes ago, with his phone in his hand, and his eyes tracking the street through the glass with the focused patience of a man who had made his calls, and was now allowing the sequence he'd initiated to run its course. Tracy stood beside him. She wasn't sure when that had become the natural arrangement. The two of them at the west wall while the lobby existed around them in its suspended state, the detail members at the entrance vestibule, Victor against the far wall with his hands secured behind him, the piano bench empty, the chandelier doing what chandeliers do, which is hang there and illuminate everything impartially. But In-ho hadn't indicated she should move, and moving felt like a decision that required more energy than she currently had available. She watched the street. The occupants of the third vehicle moved first. Two of them, crossing to the building directly opposite the hotel, the one with the sightline Victor's man had described in the loading dock. They entered through the ground floor without apparent difficulty, which meant either the building's access had been prearranged, or these were people for whom access was rarely a genuine obstacle. 3 minutes later, In-ho's phone buzzed. He read the message. His expression didn't change. "They have him," he said, to no one in particular, to the room. Tracy understood that the man across the street, the one with the remote trigger, watching a car door that had remained closed, was no longer watching anything. The bomb technicians approached the sedan from the service lane side. Tracy couldn't see all of it from the lobby interior. The angle was wrong. The sedan parked too close to the curb's edge, but she could see enough. 2 technicians and equipment she recognized from television, but had never seen in actual proximity, moving around the vehicle with the deliberate economy of people for whom speed and carefulness were not opposites, but the same discipline expressed simultaneously. The hotel's kitchen staff had begun to gather. She noticed it incrementally, the first face appearing at the edge of the service corridor access near the lobby's east side, a kitchen porter she recognized from the dock, who had apparently heard enough through the building's internal circulation to understand that something significant was occurring in the front of house. Then a prep cook. Then 2 of the serving staff from the restaurant level, still in their uniforms. They collected at the corridor entrance in the uncertain way of people who have no official reason to be somewhere, and a very human reason to be there anyway. The chef appeared last, his white coat still marked from service, his expression reconfigured from the dismissive authority he'd carried in the kitchen into something that didn't have the same structural confidence behind it. He looked at the lobby, at Victor against the far wall, at the activity visible through the glass at the curb. His eyes moved to Tracy. She looked back at him without particular feeling about it. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the acknowledgement of 2 people who had been in the same building during the same event and had responded to it in ways that had led them to opposite positions in its aftermath. He looked away first. The technician's voice came through In-ho's phone speaker at 6:18 p.m. In-ho had taken the call on speaker without appearing to make a deliberate choice about it, or perhaps he had made the deliberate choice, and the deliberateness was simply invisible, the way most of his decisions were. Tracy heard it clearly. Device confirmed. Under the driver's seat, left rear position. Remote detonation assembly, professional grade. We're looking at a kill radius that would have taken the vehicle and anyone within 4 meters. In-ho's thumb moved on the screen. The call ended. The lobby was very quiet. Tracy thought about the driver, the man who'd been sitting behind that wheel, engine running, waiting for his employer to emerge from the revolving door. A man whose job was to drive, and who had been sitting 4 meters from a device powerful enough to register 4 meters as a relevant measurement of consequence. She thought about the kitchen staff at the service corridor entrance, who moved through the loading dock every day and had been 2 floors above a conspiracy conducted in their building's basement. She thought about Grandmother White on Delmont Street, orange notebook open on the kitchen table, watching the clock tick past the time Tracy should have been home. The technician's words reorganized themselves in her chest. Kill radius. Anyone within 4 meters, not an abstraction, a Tuesday evening, a car at a curb, A man with a routine so precise it had become its own vulnerability. In-ho stood with his phone at his side and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said to the detail member nearest him, "Bring him." They walked Victor through the lobby. Not through a side exit or a service corridor or any of the building's many available routes that would have kept the moment contained and private. Through the lobby, past the chandelier and the empty piano bench and the marble floor and the gathered kitchen staff at the corridor entrance who had no official reason to be there, and watched with the complete attention of people witnessing something they understood mattered. Victor walked with the produced dignity of a man who had decided that what his face did in the next 60 seconds was the last thing in this sequence he could control. His jaw was set. His eyes moved forward. He didn't look at In-ho, and he didn't look at the kitchen staff, and he didn't, until the last possible moment, when the route to the exit brought him within 10 feet of the corridor entrance. Look at Tracy. When he did look at her, she held it. Not defiantly. Not with the performed courage of someone making a point. She just didn't look away, because looking away would have meant something she wasn't willing for it to mean, and her grandmother had taught her long before her father's Arabic lessons that there were moments when the only thing required of you was to remain exactly where you were and let the truth of the situation be witnessed. Victor looked away. He was walked through the revolving door and into the evening, and the lobby exhaled. The questions came in stages. 2 investigators arrived at 6:31 and established a workspace in the hotel's private conference room off the lobby's south side. In-ho went in first. Tracy sat in a chair outside the conference room door with a glass of water someone had brought her and her work gloves finally off, sat on her knee, and waited. The investigators came for her at 6:47. The questioning was careful and unhurried in the way of professionals who understood they were talking to a 9-year-old and had adjusted their methodology accordingly. They asked her to walk through the loading dock sequence twice, not because they doubted her account, she sensed, but because precision mattered and a second pass sometimes surfaced details the first pass had moved past too quickly. On the second pass, she remembered something she hadn't included the first time. One of the mercenaries in the south corridor, the quieter one, the third voice, had said something at the very end of the exchange, just before they'd moved away. She'd been so focused on the primary operational details that the final sentence had registered, and then been overtaken by everything that followed. The kitchen staff won't even know what happened until it's news. She told the investigators this, watched one of them write it down. They were going to blame the gas line, she said. In the kitchen, Victor said it, he said it would look like an accident. The investigator looked up from his notes. Where did you hear that specifically? In the dock, before I went to find the chef. She thought back, the fluorescent lights, the cold metal of the shelf against her palms. Victor said something about the incident report, that the gas line in the service corridor had been showing pressure irregularities, that it would read as a maintenance failure. The 2 investigators exchanged a look across the table that communicated something Tracy didn't have full access to, but understood the shape of the piece that connects other pieces, the detail that reorganizes the picture of how many moving parts this had required, and how many people had touched those parts before today. One of them left the room. She sat with the remaining investigator and answered 3 more questions and drank the rest of her water and looked at the conference room table's surface, which was dark wood polished to a finish that reflected the overhead light in a long, pale stripe. How many others? The question moved through her without fully resolving. The 2 mercenaries from the dock, the man across the street, whoever had filed the false maintenance report about the gas line, whoever had provided access to the vehicle for long enough to place the device. Victor was contained. The trigger man was contained. But a sequence with this many components had more hands in it than the ones currently accounted for. And the investigators' exchanged look had confirmed that without either of them saying a word. She thought about the hotel, the kitchen staff at the corridor entrance, Mr. Rowe at the freight scale, the housekeeping attendant in the service hallway, all the people who moved through the back of this building every day, invisible to the front of it, present for everything. Any one of them could have seen something. Any one of them might not have known what they'd seen. Any one of them could still be carrying information they didn't know was information. The investigator asked her if she was all right. "Yes," she said then. "Is the driver okay, the man in the car?" The investigator paused. "He's been checked out, he's fine." She nodded, set her water glass down precisely on the table. "And the kitchen staff, the gas line, if Victor filed a false report to cover the explosion, does that mean someone in maintenance was?" "We're looking into all of it," the investigator said. Careful, measured. The answer of someone who was not going to tell a 9-year-old the full architecture of what they were unraveling before they'd finished unraveling it. Which meant the answer was yes. There were more threads. The investigation was wider than the lobby and the parking curb and the south corridor of the loading dock. Tracy picked up her work gloves from the table. She thought about walking back into that kitchen tomorrow. About Bay 3 and the freight scale and Mr. Rowe's clipboard and the chef's sign-off window closing at 6. About whether any of that would look the same from the inside once you'd seen what the building's blind spots were capable of concealing. She thought about Victor saying nobody in this building speaks Arabic. The confidence of that. The absolute certainty that the people who moved through the back of this building were so completely invisible that their invisibility was a usable asset, that you could conduct a conspiracy in the basement because the people in the basement didn't count as people who might complicate your plan. He'd been wrong about exactly one thing, and that one thing had been enough. At 7:12, In-ho came out of the conference room. He stopped when he saw her still in the chair. Something moved across his face, the same expression from the lobby that she still didn't have a full word for, the one that lived beneath the managed surface of a man who had spent 14 years excising sentiment from his operation, and was apparently discovering that excision had a cost he hadn't finished calculating. He looked at her work gloves in her hands, at the sign delivery slip still visible in her front pocket. "You never got on the bus," he said. "No," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The conference room door was still open behind him, and the investigator inside it was writing something, and the lobby beyond the corridor was beginning to return to itself. A staff member resetting the concierge station, the distant sound of the kitchen resuming service 2 hours late, the hotel's machinery restarting with the particular resilience of systems designed to continue. "Is there someone coming to get you?" In-ho asked. Tracy thought of her grandmother, the kitchen window, the orange notebook, the right column that had been winning for 3 months, and the hotel contract that held everything else up. "I'll take the bus," she said. "I know the route." In-ho looked at her for a long moment. "Not tonight," he said. The car that pulled onto Delmont Street on Thursday morning was wrong for the block. Not aggressively wrong. It didn't announce itself the way wealth sometimes did, chrome and noise, and the particular performance of a vehicle that wanted to be noticed. It was simply too considered for a street where cars were chosen for reliability and monthly payment feasibility rather than anything else. Dark, clean, moving at the careful speed of a driver who understood he was in unfamiliar territory and was treating that unfamiliarity with respect. It stopped in front of the house, with the wire pens in the side yard. Grandmother White was at the packing table when the car arrived. Tracy was in the pen closest to the gate, running the morning count, her breath visible in the cool air, her work gloves back on her hands where they belonged. She heard the car before she saw it, the particular sound of an engine cutting off on a quiet street, and looked up through the wire mesh. She recognized the vehicle, not the specific car, but the category of it. The Grand Imperial had a fleet of 4. She straightened up and pulled off her right glove and wiped her hand on her jeans. Her grandmother had turned from the packing table and was watching the car with the expression she used for things that required assessment before response. Not alarm, not welcome, just the careful attention of a woman who had lived long enough to know that unexpected arrivals on an ordinary Thursday morning were rarely without consequence in either direction. The driver came around first and opened the rear door, which was the detail that would stay with Tracy afterward, not because it was surprising that In-ho's driver would open his door, but because the man who stepped out of it moved differently than the man she'd seen in the lobby 2 days ago. The lobby version had carried the forward momentum of someone whose world arranged itself in advance. This version stepped out of the car on Delmont Street and paused, looked at the yard. At the wire pens and the feed buckets and the modest organized operation that had been running before sunrise every morning for years. He was wearing a coat she hadn't seen before, darker than the lobby jacket, less architectural. He had a folder under his left arm and nothing in his right hand, which was different from the briefcase that had been a permanent extension of the man she'd observed from service corridors and loading docks. He looked at Tracy through the gate. She looked back at him. "Your grandmother's home," he said. "She's at the packing table," Tracy said. "I'll open the gate." Grandmother White did not make people wait in the yard. This was a principle of the house as fundamental as the morning count and the orange notebook. You did not leave a person standing outside the gate while you decided what to do about them, because a person at your gate was already committed to the interaction, and leaving them there was its own kind of answer. You brought them in. You found out what they'd come for. You made your decision from there. She had the kettle on before Tracy had finished introducing them, which was both hospitality and strategy. The kettle gave her something to do with her hands, while she processed the fact that the owner of the Grand Imperial Hotel was standing in her kitchen in a coat that cost more than her monthly income, holding a folder, looking at the photographs on the refrigerator door with an expression she hadn't yet categorized. Tracy stood at the kitchen doorway and watched both of them navigate the strangeness of the situation without a map. In-Ho looked at the photographs. Her grandmother at the packing table, years younger, with 24 hens behind her and her housecoat already tucked into the rubber boots. A family photograph from before, Tracy's parents on either side of a younger grandmother White, the three of them squinting into summer light. Tracy at 7, in the pen, holding a hen with the careful grip her grandmother had taught her. He looked at that one for a moment longer than the others. "Tracy tells me you've been supplying the hotel for 14 months, her grandmother said from the stove. Her voice was composed in the way it was composed when she was working hardest to keep it that way. 15 as of this week, In-Ho said. He set the folder on the kitchen table, didn't open it. You've had the same delivery schedule for that entire period. No missed orders, no quality issues. The chef's records show a 2% spoilage rate across all deliveries, which is the lowest of any of the hotel's current produce suppliers." Grandmother White turned from the stove. She looked at him with the particular look she reserved for people who had done their homework, not impressed exactly, because she didn't impress quickly, but acknowledging that the work had been done. "You checked the chef's records," she said. "Before I came." He pulled out the chair across from where the folder sat and waited, not sitting, waiting, which Tracy understood was a question being asked without words. Her grandmother looked at the chair, looked at him, and with the slight movement of her chin that meant go ahead, granted the answer. He sat. She brought 3 cups to the table and sat across from him, and Tracy took the chair at the end and put her hands flat on the table and waited to find out what was in the folder. In-Ho didn't open it immediately. He looked at his cup for a moment. Then at the table's surface, the worn wood, the ring marks from years of mourning cups, the small chip at the far corner that Tracy had caused at age 5, and that had never been repaired because her grandmother had decided to leave it as a record of the fact that things happened in this kitchen, and the kitchen survived them. "I owe your granddaughter a debt," he said. He said it plainly, without the framing language that people sometimes use to make direct statements feel more comfortable. "I'm not here to make a transaction out of that. The debt exists separately from anything else I'm going to say." Grandmother White looked at him steadily. "She told me what happened. What she did required more courage than most adults I've encountered in 14 years of running an operation that required courage regularly." He paused. "She did it for a man who had never once acknowledged her existence. I want to understand why." The kitchen was quiet, except for the kettle's residual heat ticking in the element. Grandmother White looked at Tracy. The look that said, "This is yours to answer." Tracy thought about the freezer, about Damir, about the specific quality of knowing something and the weight of that knowing when you were the only one carrying it. Because knowing and doing nothing are the same thing, she said, the same words she'd given him in the lobby. I told you that. You did, In-ho said. I've been thinking about it since. He opened the folder. There were 3 documents inside. He set them on the table in a row without overlapping them, the arrangement of a person who organized information spatially. The first was a supply contract. Tracy could read it from her angle, her eyes moved to the numbers before she could stop them, and the numbers were not the numbers of the existing arrangement. They were larger, significantly. A restructured agreement covering 2 properties. The Grand Imperial and a second hotel property she didn't recognize the name of, with a volume requirement that would need more hens, more pens, more feed, and more mornings. But that paid for all of those things and then continued past them into territory that the Orange Notebook's right column had never visited. Her grandmother looked at it without touching it. Her grandmother's hands, Tracy noticed, were very still on the table. The second document was a single-page letter on Grand Imperial letterhead, addressed to the hotel's kitchen management team. It was a directive, In-ho's signature at the bottom, dated yesterday, establishing a formal vendor recognition protocol for all service-level suppliers. Names on file, direct contact numbers, a quarterly review process that elevated supply relationships from the operational background into documented partnerships with named contacts on both sides. No more egg girl, no more delivery kid. A name on a form, in a system, in a building that had previously organized itself around making certain people invisible. Tracy looked at the letter and felt something happen in her chest that she didn't try to name. The third document was smaller than the others. A single page, not on hotel letterhead. A personal letter, handwritten in a script that was precise without being ornamental. The handwriting of someone who wrote by hand rarely enough that they were deliberate about it when they did. In-ho looked at it, but didn't move it toward them. It was the only document he hadn't placed for them to read. That one is for Tracy, he said, when she wants to read it. Grandmother White picked up the supply contract. She read it the way she read everything important, completely, without rushing, moving through each clause with the Orange Notebook precision of a woman who had learned that the details were where the actual agreement lived, not the headline. In-ho sat across from her and did not speak while she read, which Tracy recognized as one of the more significant things she'd observed him do, the capacity to be in a room while someone else moved at their own pace, without filling the silence with his own. When her grandmother finished, she set the contract down and aligned its edge with the table's edge, a habit so ingrained she likely didn't notice it. This volume requires expansion, she said. The current operation can't fulfill these numbers without capital investment. More birds, additional pens, upgraded equipment for the packing process. Yes, In-ho said. I'm not in a position to take on debt for that expansion. I'm not proposing debt. He reached into the folder and produced a 4th page that he hadn't laid out initially. A financing arrangement, interest-free, structured as an advance against the contract value rather than a loan, repayable through the supply agreement itself. No bank, no application, no right column winning over a left column because some institution had decided the risk profile of a 71-year-old woman running a poultry operation on Delmont Street didn't meet their threshold. Grandmother White looked at the 4th page. Then she looked at In-ho with an expression Tracy had never seen on her face before, or rather, had seen only once, in a photograph from before the accident, in which her grandmother was looking at Tracy's father with the combination of pride and something more complicated that family love sometimes carried. You did your homework, her grandmother said again, quieter this time. I've spent 2 days thinking about what precision costs, In-ho said. What you miss when you're only looking at the things directly in front of you. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, one of the hens made a sound, the particular announcement that meant she'd laid and wanted acknowledgement for it, a small declaration from the yard that the morning's work was continuing regardless. Grandmother White looked at the contract, at the letter, at the 4th page, at In-ho. Then she looked at Tracy. and Tracy watched her grandmother's eyes fill. Not spilling over. Her grandmother was not a woman who spilled over easily, but filling, the way a vessel fills when what's being poured into it has reached the level of what it's been waiting to receive for a long time. Happy tears. The specific kind that came not from the relief of something bad being avoided, but from the arrival of something good that you'd stopped letting yourself expect. Tracy felt her own throat tighten and looked at the table. In-ho looked at neither of them. He looked at his cup, giving the moment the privacy it needed, which was the most human thing she'd seen him do. "There's one more thing," he said, when the kitchen had resettled. He looked at Tracy. "The letter, read it when you're ready, but I want to tell you directly what it says so it's not only words on a page." She looked at him. "Your father was right about languages," he said. "He was right about a lot of things based on how you came out." A pause. "I'd like to establish an educational fund, in his name. For you, whatever you decide to study, wherever that takes you. No conditions on it except that you use it." The hen in the yard made her announcement again, louder, in case anyone had missed it the first time. Tracy looked at the folder, at the handwritten letter with her name on it in precise, deliberate script, at her grandmother's hands on the table, no longer still, one of them having moved, without apparent decision, to cover Tracy's. She thought about a kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, a boiled egg, a tape player, Beta, her father holding it up like it was worth knowing, because to him everything was worth knowing because keys were only useless until you found the door. She looked at In-ho. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, the nod of a man who had something to say and had decided that what he'd already said was enough, and that the rest of it would have to be demonstrated over time rather than declared in a kitchen on Delmont Street on a Thursday morning. He picked up his cup. Outside, 31 hens were moving through the yard in the unhurried way of creatures for whom the morning was simply the morning, productive, ordinary, sufficient. The packing table was waiting. The orange notebook was on the counter. The right column had, as of the documents now sitting on the kitchen table, lost its advantage for the foreseeable future. The kettle had gone cold. Nobody moved to reheat it. The front door was heavier than she'd imagined. Not physically, a doorman held it, a tall man in a dark coat with silver buttons who pulled it open with the practiced ease of someone who had performed this exact motion several thousand times and had long since stopped thinking about it. The weight was something else. The accumulated significance of a threshold she had passed beside and beneath and around for 15 months without once crossing through it directly. Tracy crossed through it directly. The lobby received her the way it received everyone who came through the front, with the impartial grandeur of a space that had been designed to make arrivals feel significant. The chandelier, the marble, the piano, this time occupied, a different musician playing something unhurried and precise. The concierge at his station looking up with the automatic professional attention that the front entrance triggered in him regardless of who was walking through it. His eyes found her, moved across the red zip-up, the same one, the left shoulder fully repaired now, her grandmother having fixed the seam on Wednesday evening without being asked, and the dark jeans and the good sneakers, the ones without the hole in the left toe. He held her gaze for a moment with the expression of someone whose categorization system had encountered a filing challenge. Then his eyes moved to the badge on her left side. It was a simple thing, a rectangular card on a lanyard, the Grand Imperial's crest in the upper left corner, her photograph, taken last Monday in the hotel's administrative office by a woman with a camera who had told her to look at the lens and not smile if she didn't want to, which she hadn't, and below it, in clean sans serif type, Tracy White, Jr., Consultant, Operational Development. The concierge's expression reorganized itself. He nodded. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," Tracy said, and walked across the marble toward the elevator bank. 3 weeks had passed, since Thursday on Delmont Street. The investigation had continued well past that morning. The threads that the investigators' exchanged look had implied were longer and more tangled than a lobby arrest, and a bomb removal suggested. Victor had named 4 additional people during questioning. 2 members of the hotel's maintenance staff who had filed the false gas line report, 1 external logistics contact who had provided vehicle access for the device installation, and a mid-level employee in Ho's former operations who had been feeding schedule information to the coordination team for 6 weeks before Tuesday. All 4 had been located within 72 hours. The investigation was ongoing in the way that investigations with this many components remained ongoing, open at the edges even when the central structure had been resolved. But the immediate threat had been contained, accounted for, and documented with the precision that legal processes required. Tracy had given a formal statement. Twice. The second time with her grandmother present, who had sat beside her with her hands in her lap and her face composed in the expression she used when she was paying complete attention and intended for that attention to be visible. The educational fund had been established. Her grandmother had reviewed the documentation with the same thoroughness she'd applied to the supply contract, and had asked 2 questions that the administrator hadn't anticipated, both of which had required follow-up before the paperwork was finalized. Ho, when told about the questions, had apparently said nothing in response, but the administrator had relayed that his expression had suggested something that was not displeasure. The new supply contract had gone into effect on the 1st of the month. The expansion planning was underway. 2 new pens, 12 additional birds, an upgraded packing system that would bring the spoilage rate from 2% to something her grandmother had calculated could reach below 1. The right column in the orange notebook was losing by a margin that grew each time grandmother White made her marks. The handwritten letter was in the shoebox under Tracy's bed, with the cassette tapes. She had read it 4 times. She didn't think she would stop at 4. The junior consultant arrangement had been in Ho's proposal and her grandmother's negotiation. The proposal, 2 afternoons per week, Tracy would accompany the operational development team during their back-of-house reviews. The assessments of the hotel's service-level systems that Ho had commissioned in the aftermath of Tuesday, when the blind spots in his building's invisible infrastructure had become impossible to continue treating as someone else's domain. She would observe. She would ask questions. She would, in the language of the formal arrangement her grandmother had insisted on putting into writing, provide perspective informed by direct operational experience in the hotel's service environment. Her grandmother's negotiation, a rate of compensation structured as a learning stipend, paid monthly into the educational fund, reasonable hours that didn't interfere with school, a formal review at 6 months. And this was the line her grandmother had written herself in the margin of the draft agreement in her own handwriting, the right to walk through the front entrance. Ho had read the margin note, had looked at it for a moment, had signed the document with the margin note included without changing a word of it. So here she was, front entrance, badge on her lanyard, the marble floor doing what it always did, which was reflect everything back at itself with complete impartiality. The operational development team met on the 4th floor. It was a different world from the lobby, a working floor, conference rooms and administrative offices, the hotel's actual machinery rather than its presentation. Tracy had been here twice already in the preceding weeks for orientation sessions that had been led by a quiet, methodical woman named Director Seo, who ran the team with the organized precision of someone who had been doing this work long enough to have strong opinions about why it hadn't been done properly before. Director Seo had looked at Tracy's badge on the first day with an expression that was not quite skepticism and not quite welcome. Something more honest than either, the look of a professional being asked to integrate an unusual variable into a functioning system and reserving judgment until the variable had demonstrated its actual properties. By the end of the second session, the expression had shifted. Tracy had asked a question about the service corridor camera coverage. Specifically, why the dead mount in the South Dock corridor had been on the maintenance request list for 11 weeks without resolution, and Director Seo had looked at her for a long moment and then written something in her own notebook. Today was the 3rd session. Tracy stepped out of the elevator on 4 and walked down the corridor toward the conference room and past 2 administrative staff members who both glanced at her badge and both said good morning, which was 2 more good mornings than she had received in 15 months of coming through the service entrance. She filed that away, not bitterly, just accurately. In-ho was in the conference room. This was not expected. The sessions were run by Director Seo, and In-ho's presence at operational level meetings was not, she'd gathered, a regular occurrence. He was standing at the window on the room's far side when she entered, looking out at the city with his hands in his jacket pockets, which was a different posture from the window standing she'd observed in her imagination of his morning routine. Less surveying, more present. He turned when she came in. "You're early," he said. 15 minutes. She set her bag on the table. "I didn't know if I'd be able to find the room." "You've been here twice." "I know where it is," she said. "I came early in case I didn't." Something moved across his face. The expression she'd accumulated enough data on now to recognize, the one that lived beneath the managed surface, that surfaced when something had made contact with the layer underneath the calculation. It lasted approximately 1 second, and then the surface reorganized itself. "Director Seo will be here at 9, he said. "I wanted to speak with you before the session." She sat down, folded her hands on the table, waited. In-ho remained at the window for a moment longer, then moved to the chair across from her, not at the head of the table, across from her, which she noted, and sat with the folder he'd had under his arm since she'd entered. Not the Delmont Street folder. A different one, thinner, more preliminary in its weight. "The investigation identified a systemic issue," he said. "Beyond Victor and the people he named. The back-of-house infrastructure of this hotel and the second property, and potentially a third I'm acquiring, has been operating as an entirely separate world from the front-of-house. Different information systems, different reporting chains, no integrated oversight." "I know," Tracy said. He looked at her. "I've been coming through Bay 3 for 15 months, she said. "Nothing that happens in the dock reaches the front. Nothing that happens in the front reaches the dock. The chef doesn't know what the freight manager knows. The freight manager doesn't know what the kitchen porter knows. Everyone is invisible to everyone else except the people directly above them." In-ho was quiet for a moment. Director Seo's assessment used almost identical language. "Director Seo is right." "Yes," he opened the folder. "The development project we're building addresses this. Integrated reporting, unified communication systems, back-of-house visibility brought into the same operational framework as front-of-house." He turned the folder toward her. A project outline, preliminary, the kind of document that was more questions than answers at this stage. "I want your observation notes from the first 2 sessions incorporated into the baseline assessment. Your specific observations from the service environment over the past 15 months. Tracy looked at the outline. At the structure of it, the places where the questions lived, the gaps in the current data that the project was designed to fill. She thought about Mr. Rowe at the freight scale, logging crates with a clipboard that connected to nothing above it. About the housekeeping attendant in the service corridor who moved through the building every day, seeing everything and reporting to a system that didn't ask what she'd seen. About the camera mount that had been empty for 11 weeks while 3 men stood beneath it and planned a murder in a language they were confident nobody could understand. About the way invisibility, when it was structural rather than personal, became a weapon available to anyone willing to use it. "I have notes," she said. "From before Tuesday. I started writing things down about 8 months ago, just observations. I didn't know why I was keeping them." In-ho looked at her steadily. "Your father taught you to pay attention." "He taught me that the world hands you what you need if you've been watching," she said. "I didn't know I was going to need any of it." "Most people don't know what they're collecting until they need it," In-ho said. He closed the folder, pushed it toward her side of the table. "The notes are part of the project now, if you're willing." Director Seo arrived at 9 with 2 members of the development team, and an agenda that moved efficiently through its items in the manner of someone who treated meeting time as a finite resource with a measurable cost per minute. She acknowledged Tracy with the nod that had replaced the first day's reserved assessment, the nod of a professional who had updated her file on a variable and found the update satisfactory. The session ran 90 minutes. Tracy spoke 4 times. Each time, she said what she'd observed and where and when, without framing or apology, the way her grandmother made her marks in the orange notebook. Because the information was true and true information didn't require dressing up to justify its presence in the room. The 4th time, one of the development team members, a man who had not previously directed anything at her, turned and asked a follow-up question. A genuine one, the kind that came from someone who needed the answer rather than someone being polite about a child in a room where children didn't usually sit. She answered it. He wrote it down. Afterward, in the corridor outside the conference room, Director Seo stopped beside her while the rest of the team continued toward the elevator. "Your notes from the past 8 months," she said. "Can you have them to me by Friday?" "Yes," Tracy said. Director Seo nodded, started to move, then stopped, looked at Tracy with the expression she used when she was going to say something she'd decided to say rather than something the situation required. "I've worked in hotel operations for 19 years, she said. "I've done back-of-house assessments in 11 properties. What you described in there, the freight reporting gap, the camera coverage blind spots, the information siloing between dock and kitchen level, I've seen versions of it in every property I've ever assessed." A pause. Nobody who worked in those environments ever put it into a room where it could be addressed, because the room didn't exist for them. She looked at Tracy's badge, at the name and the title and the grand imperial crest. "The room exists now," she said, and walked toward the elevator. Tracy stood in the 4th-floor corridor for a moment after Director Seo left. The hotel moved around her, a staff member passing with a tablet, someone's phone ringing briefly behind a closed door, the muffled ambient sound of a large building running its many simultaneous systems with the coordinated complexity that was only visible if you knew where to look for it. She looked at her badge. Then she thought about something the handwritten letter had said. She'd read it 4 times and the line had been there each time, in Inho's precise, deliberate script, near the bottom of the page. She had been thinking about it since. "I built everything I have by deciding what to see and what to look through. I was wrong about the 2nd category. The 2nd category was where the actual world was." She thought about Bay 3, about the freight scale and the flickering lights and the cold metal of a shelf against her palms, and 3 voices in Arabic in a corridor where the camera mount had been empty for 11 weeks. She thought about a walk-in freezer and her father's voice and one word, Damir, that had been traveling through 3 years and 7 cassette tapes and a hotel basement to arrive at a lobby at 5:58 on a Tuesday evening. She thought about Inho at the conference table across from her, not at the head of it, the folder pushed to her side. Was he a good person now? The question lived at the edges of everything. She'd heard it in the way people around her had talked about the events of that Tuesday, in the investigator's careful neutrality, in her grandmother's measured assessment of the Delmont Street visit. A man who had built an empire through ruthlessness and zero sentiment had signed documents and established funds and put a margin note about a front entrance into a formal agreement. People wanted the question resolved, wanted to file him cleanly, reformed, or performing reform, changed or strategically adjusting. Tracy thought about what her father had believed, which was that people were not fixed points but directions. That the question was never who someone had been, but which way they were currently facing and how consistently they were walking that way. Inho was facing a different direction than he'd been facing on the morning. He'd dismissed a delivery delay with cold arrogance and gone back to his briefcase. Whether that made him good was a longer question than a Thursday morning or a signed contract or a conference room across from rather than head of could answer. She was 9 years old. She had time to watch and see. She pressed the elevator button for the lobby. When the doors opened at ground level, she walked out across the marble, past the concierge who said good morning again, past the piano, past the central seating area and its impartial grandeur, and through the front door, which the doorman held open with the same practiced ease as before. The city outside was running its Tuesday morning systems, delivery trucks, commuters, The ordinary choreography of people moving between where they'd been and where they were going. Tracy stood on the front steps of the Grand Imperial Hotel and looked at the service lane around the corner, where a cart with 3 egg crates was being unloaded at Bay 3 by a kid she didn't recognize, new, probably, or a replacement while she was reassigned. Someone who would learn the freight scale and the chef's sign-off window and the particular invisibility of the back-of house, the way she had learned it. She thought about going around to introduce herself, about saying something useful about the South Corridor camera and the maintenance request system, and the things worth paying attention to when the building thought no one was watching. She looked at her badge. At the title on it, in clean sans serif type, that said junior consultant, but meant something closer to what Director CO had named in the corridor upstairs. The room exists now. She went back inside. She walked through the front door. The concierge said good morning. The room exists now. Drop a heart if Tracy White just became your favorite character in anything. Is In Ho good now? Comment visible with what you think, because that question doesn't have a clean answer and the best stories never pretend otherwise. This channel is yours as much as it is ours. If you've made it to the end of this story, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop the word EGGS in the comments so we know you were here from the beginning. Tracy started invisible. She ended essential. And she did it with her father's language, her grandmother's backbone. And 17 minutes that changed everything.